But yeah, so Make Them Pay campaign. There's a website for the campaign, which is makethempay.info. You can see all the demands on there. There's video with testimony videos, there's resources if you want to print out the banners, and there's updates on what we're up to, and you can also sign up to the mailing list on there as well. So please check that out. Today we've got a number of speakers. Firstly, we're going to have Gianluca, who's in Scientist Rebellion. We're then going to hear from Magdalena Heuwieser from Stay Grounded. Then you'll hear from me, Finlay. I'm an aerospace engineer. I was designing aircraft engines and I was involved in the actions last week. And then finally from Pete Kalmus, who's also a climate scientist. So I can stay in control of the slides if you want. And I'll just cover the agenda and then you can jump on, Gianluca. So what we're going to do, sorry, we've managed to format this badly. There should be 5 points. So number 1, why we're taking action. Number 2, the climate injustice of aviation. Number 3, our campaign demands. We're then going to go have a report from Global Action last week. Anyone is welcome to add their experiences from their local actions and how it was perceived and sort of feedback they got. And then we're going to cover next steps with the campaign and how to get involved going forwards. So yeah, so firstly, if my slides are going to work, we'll have Gianluca just give a bit of a background to this action from a science perspective.
Yes, thank you, Finlay, and thank you all participants. Yeah, I'll do my best, and yeah, we're just back from the excitement of I think this is probably the first really international action demanding to do something about one of the major instances of injustice in emissions, but more or less in general. And yeah, of course, it wasn't by chance that this campaign started during the COP period, you know, the meeting, the so-called Conference of the Parties, in which the heads of states from all countries, pretty much all countries, meet in one place to decide basically the future of our climate. And here on the slide on the left, you can see basically how all the previous international events have basically changed close to nothing in terms of the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. And yeah, so you can see that there has been, and of course we know that the concentration of CO2 and more general greenhouse gases is what really determines the global warming that we are witnessing. So in this chart, you have color stripes that represent how much we are deviating from the average temperature that we experienced in the, I think, in 1970s. And on what we wanted to highlight in this campaign is really the big layers of inequalities that underpin what is going on. And in the other chart that you see on the right of your screen, taken from works by Oxfam, you have a very clear picture of how much emissions of greenhouse gases are distributed among groups of people classified according to their income. And so you can see that more than 50% of emissions concerning consumption are the responsibility of the richest 10% of people in the world, and in particular the richest 1% have a disproportionate share. They are responsible for 27% of emissions connected with the consumption, whereas the poorest half of the world population is only responsible for about 13% of emissions. You can move on. And of course, these are inequalities that are striking. And yeah, this is just an example. So we can see that this concerns the North America per capita emission. So you can see that even within countries, not just at the global level, you can see how really unfair the situation is with the top 1%, so the richest 1% emitting around 70 tons of CO2 every year, then the top 10% emitting around 30 tons, whereas the bottom half about 5 tons of CO2, which is close to the global average. Please move on. Yeah, and so the background to action was focusing specifically to the COP27, as I was saying. So of course there is always this big call, listen to the science, that comes from groups like Scientist Rebellion, Extinction Rebellion, and one of our main demands is really to make policy and political action based on what the science really says. And I mean, we don't need to go very far. So the IPCC report published this year raised, I would say, as strong as possible an alarm. Some of the really scary things that you can read in this report is, for instance, that if we go with at the current trend, at the current rate of emissions, half of the world population will be faced with the life-threatening conditions during their lifetime. So these, just making a little bit of statistics, a little bit of algebra, could truly mean that hundreds of millions of people will be in the danger for their life. And yeah, so this another slide that also puts these inequalities into perspective. So in the chart on the left, we have another Oxfam report that I think shows very clearly, again, the very unfair distribution of responsibility when it comes to emission. So here, the black line that you see at the bottom here, this represents the carbon budget level that would be compatible with the objective, with the Paris Agreement objective of keeping temperatures below 1.5. Of course, even the UN report now says that 1.5 is basically in practice unachievable, because yeah, there is not really, even if it is still physically possible, there isn't really a feasible pathway that could lead us to stay within this region. But even so, even taking this as a benchmark, you can see that the gap coming from the richest 1% is about 30 times more than what would be needed. And the gap, so the excess emissions by the richest 10% is in the range of 19 tons of CO2. Instead, you can see that the middle 40% are not far off the target. So their excess emissions is only 2.5 tons of CO2. And you can see that the poorest half actually is well below the target. So, you know, some people tell us, okay, but you're targeting a sector that is not so crucial. But, you know, this is the thing that we want to bring up with this campaign, that the main responsibility for the current crisis really lies with the richest 10%. If by, let's say, paradoxically enough, the consumption of the richest 10% of the world could be brought down at the level of the global average, we would still be nearly on target to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. On the picture on the right, and then I'll really stop, you have another representation of per capita emissions by world income group. This is a more recent work by Oxfam, in which they also keep into account not only consumption, but also investment. And basically, you cannot even see the share of the bottom 50% because it's only 1.5 ton of CO2 emitted every year. And if you go up to the top 0.01%, you can see that they emit 2,500, this really staggering amount, 2,500 tons of CO2. So I think this graph really says it all about inequalities in emissions. And we also wanted to really pick up on in our demands that will be explained in a moment. We wanted to pick up on the demand that comes from the global South and also from civic assemblies, citizen assemblies. So there is a strong demand coming from the global South to implement global taxation, climate-related taxation, in order to fund the adaptation and the compensation for the damages already created by the global North to the global South. So this is really something that is at the heart of our campaign. And I stop there.
Thank you. Lena, do you want to go on from there?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation, and thank you so much for all those great actions that have been happening in the last weeks or week, starting with the Amsterdam action and then like actions on one day in 13 different countries. That's amazing. I'm part of the Stay Grounded network. Next slide, please. So we are a global network of almost 200 member organizations around the world, most of them in Europe, but also in the global South. And we are a people-powered, action-oriented network, trying to foster mutual support and exchange of experiences, campaigning for a reduction of aviation and its negative impacts, and trying to build a just mobility system, and being part of general system change that's needed. And what I wanted to add to Gianluca is that it's true that like the main responsibility of the climate crisis lies with the wealthy people, not only because of emissions, but also because they are actually the ones owning all those industries who are producing even more emissions than they are doing, like producing in their individual lifestyles. And also because they are the ones in power actually maintaining those policies that hinder the necessary system change. So that's the other dimensions of this global injustice. And I want to just say a few words about air traffic and climate crisis. Next slide, please. So air traffic is just a very emblematic symbol of the injustice. Only 1% of the world's population, cause 50% of commercial aviation emissions, while more than 80% of the world's population have never set foot on an airplane. So that's an immense inequality. And while we here in Europe or also in the US or in Australia might think that it's normal to fly, it actually is not normal at all yet. And if it was to be normalized, if everybody in the world would fly as much as the wealthy percent, and not only the very richest, then it just would not work at all. Then the whole carbon budget would basically be made up of aviation emissions, and we would need to reduce all the other sectors which are a lot more important for our living than the ability to fly everywhere quickly. Next slide, please. So private jets are just like the pit of the iceberg. So taking a private jet pollutes 10 times more than a normal airplane and pollutes 50 times more than a train. Next slide. In just 1 hour, a private jet can emit 2 tons of CO2. So if a private jet flies 4 hours, that's basically what an average European citizen emits in a whole year. Or if you compare it to an Indian average person, it's even, yeah, it's even more unbelievable how much emissions this produces. Next slide, please. You also see a very unequal distribution, regional distribution of private jets in the world, with North America actually having 71% of all private jets, and also Europe being right at the top, and with the rest really very rarely using private jets. And actually during the COVID pandemic, private jets were growing, like or were the first to come back, and actually were growing way up while other planes were still grounded. And so it's really a booming business right now. Next. So so this is like the very obvious inequality of flying, but I wanted to add another unfairness aspect, and that is that also the climate measures which are being applied in the aviation sector are very unjust. So it's really, like, we call them false solutions, because it's basically based on offsetting, which is that airlines just need to pay a little bit of money in order to say we are green, we produce carbon neutral flights, and they pay this money to other companies who then lead projects in the global south, usually, which often also lead to destruction, like very often land-based projects, forest conservation, or building or planting new trees, biofuels, hydroelectric dams, projects that often lead to human rights violations and land grabbing in the name of the climate. So we say offsetting is a false solution, and then also the industry does not want to like really wants to hold on to its growth plans, and legitimizes this also with new technology, which is not yet developed, but in the last decades it has always been saying, okay, we will become green, we will have green technology. It hasn't happened yet. It also will not happen that quickly, and probably, or definitely not in the scale that they envision. So it's a lot about biofuels here too, which also leads to land grabbing, and this conflict fuel versus fuel for food, or land and being used for producing food or for fuel. And also sustainable aviation fuels, how they are called, often have, I mean, they all are based on energy use. They all are based on the need of creating energy, and that needs space and resources, and as the question, where does it come from? So this green flying is often actually green lying. Okay, that's all from my side.
Okay, thanks, Lena. And yeah, just to say, as I said at the start, I'm an aerospace engineer. I was working with one of the main aircraft engine manufacturers inside the industry until a couple of years ago. And I worked on those fact sheets with Stay Grounded. Definitely worth looking into. If you've got any questions about aviation greenwash, you can ask me, but also definitely check out staygrounded.org/greenwashing and have a look at those fact sheets as well, because they've got lots of information in them. So yeah, what we're going to cover next is our campaign demands. So there is 3, what we hope are relatively simple, straightforward demands that we all had out on banners during the actions. So the first one was to ban private jets. The second was to tax frequent flyers, something where our numbering's gone wrong. And third was to make polluters pay. So, and yeah, you can see that they've also been stylized in yellow and black to represent airport signage, just to go with the aviation theme. So what is the detail of that messaging? So the first thing is banning private jets. Hopefully that's pretty self-explanatory. But the point is here, we aren't just targeting the average person, we're targeting the ultra wealthy in society and their sky-high emissions. Therefore, we are trying to tackle climate injustice, but also targeting economic injustice as we do that. We also, I think that was a good media hook during COP27. What you see is a lot of politicians, celebrities or influencers flying into COP27 to take part, and there's a lot of media attention just around whether that is demonstrating good climate leadership. Now, obviously, flying to the COP27 conference in terms of the importance of private flights, it probably rates quite highly. The point is, these jets are flying all of the time throughout the year as well. It's just a good opportunity to make that point. However, while it would be great to ban private jets tomorrow, there is relatively few private jets compared to all of the airlines in the world. So per person, it would make a big dent. You know, if Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates was to stop flying, their emissions would go down personally, but it wouldn't really tackle aviation emissions as a whole. So we need additional ways of doing that and additional ways of raising finance. You could obviously tax private jets as a starter, but you also think we need to tax frequent flyers. So this isn't like an opinion of this group. This is a democratic recommendation from various citizens' assemblies, climate assemblies that have looked at transport. So in the UK, in Scotland and France, at least, there's been recommendations to ban private jets, to tax aviation fuels, and to have some form of frequent flyer levy or tax, which increases the further you fly and the more frequently that you fly. The objective of this is to ensure the wealthy, high income, high emitters are paying the majority of the tax, rather than targeting low income groups who fly occasionally. This would also be an effective way of raising climate finance, which ties into the third demand. So there's been lots of studies on frequent flyer levy, could certainly raise in excess of $100 billion a year by taxing frequent flyers if we had the political will to do so. And that would cover in itself what was promised by the most developed countries to the least developed countries more than 10 years ago. And we've still not delivered. So that kind of leads into the third point, which is making polluters pay. There is this polluters pay principle, and that is just a simple principle of you pollute more, you pay more. So we thought that it's only fair that rich polluters who are the most responsible for emissions pay the most, rather than giving tax breaks to people with private jets or frequent flyers and expecting to raise any climate finance from taxing the general population who have much lower emissions. It's also really important to platform the demands of the least developed countries group. So this is kind of like the 50 poorest countries in the world who have the least money, but are also the most impacted already by climate risks and climate impacts. So at COP27 just now, they are asking for climate finance, what they call loss and damage. You could also call that reparations. Basically saying, well, we're already experiencing these impacts, very real costs. We are not responsible for them, you are. You should pay us money to help us deal with them. The other aspect is cancelling debt. So a lot of countries physically cannot transform their societies to lower carbon and don't have the money to adapt and to mitigate climate risks because they are in debt to the richer countries in the world. So that's what they're asking for. We are platforming their demands and looking to highlight and emphasize what they're after in our countries. Yep, so next slide. just to show you this is an example of one of the UK Citizens Assembly. So they've said here, key recommendations when it comes to air transport, to even out the cost of air travel compared to alternatives. A lot of you might know, it can be more expensive to take the train than fly, and that's because of the subsidies and the tax breaks on jet fuel. And that shouldn't be the case. You shouldn't be penalized financially for making a more environmental choice. They also think frequent flyers and those that fly further should pay more. That's why we had the demand of tax frequent flyers, and ban polluting private jets and helicopters, and moving to electric when possible. So I can tell you as an aerospace engineer, we're not going to see electric private jets anytime soon. So yeah, I think this is just to make clear, some people in this group are part of Extinction Rebellion. There's a third demand for citizens' assemblies. Rather than say we know what the solutions are, we say let's have a democratic process to come up with recommendations. So we're just highlighting here that has happened in a lot of countries, and frequent flyer tax has been suggested multiple times. So yeah, key aspects of the demands. We have to address emissions inequality. Aviation is particularly bad. It's unfair and it's unequal, and private jet use is the pinnacle of that and really demonstrates that. Our demands are democratic and have been driven by Citizens' Assembly recommendations rather than our opinions, to ban private jets and tax frequent flyers. And the request for global aviation tax to pay for climate loss and damage originates from the most vulnerable countries, and we want to platform their demands. So yeah, so that's the end of my section. And
yes,
then we were going to go
please.
on to action reports. So what we were thinking about here, I mean, this is a picture from Amsterdam. We've also got various pictures from Spain, Milan, the US, Norway, France, Portugal, Sweden, etc. So yeah, would anyone like to discuss or just have a little talk about what happened in your country, how it was perceived by the media and the public, and that sort of thing? I could stop sharing my screen for a minute if that works. Okay, if not, what we could do, because we're gonna have Peter talking next, so maybe you could give a bit of an overview of your action, and kind of how you perceived the other ones as well. I suppose just on my side, I was in the UK. There was 2 airports in the UK, one London Luton and 2 Farnborough. I was at the Farnborough one. That particular airport has lots of entrances, so it has about 10. We did blockade one of them, which was the main one by the big roundabout, and caused a bit of disruption. It wasn't the first time that particular airport was blockaded. So the airport actually, rather than you might have seen in some countries, there was quite heavy-handed policing towards climate protesters. In the case of Farnborough Airport, I think the airport was actually quite keen to minimize media attention and scrutiny. So they actually didn't call the police, and they just kind of dealt with it and tried to redirect traffic to other entrances. But we did get a lot of good photos with various people in Rolls Royces and Land Rovers and all sorts trying to get in our entrance and having to do a big slow U-turn in front of us, which was quite funny. As well as getting some good pictures with flares and all sorts. And it was really good to see that action take place at the same time as multiple other countries around the world doing something simultaneously. So yeah, I can pass to Peter. Would you like me to just leave the slides off?
Yeah, sure. I don't think I need the slides. So yeah, I'm not sure exactly. I'm trying to still figure out like whether this is more of a debrief among people who have who participated, or if it's more like an induction for new people. There's a few new people in the chats, but the reason I kind of start with that is that my sense of this action is that we are starting to, how do I say this? I think we've kind of like piloted a path that could be really powerful if we increase numbers. If we had like a couple of, we had basically a couple of dozen scientists who risked arrest. I think at the last count, the count's been fluctuating around. If we had a few hundred or a few thousand, I think it could be really game changing. So I've been struggling with that a little bit within Scientist Rebellion because, you know, the April 6th global action maybe got a little more attention than this action seems like it's going to get. And I was hoping after April 6th that there would be, the floodgates would open and we would get a lot of new scientists coming in and risking with us, which again, I think would be really game changing. I think even just having the few dozen scientists around the world who've been risking on these two actions has been already quite game changing. Like I think it's been helping to supercharge the climate civil disobedience movement in general. We've been seeing great work coming from groups like Just Stop Oil and Last Generation and Save Old Growth and others. Because I think scientists doing civil disobedience helps to legitimize the whole movement. And it kind of brings more attention to the movement from journalists. It's a little bit harder to be ignored. We did get a New York Times article doing a decent job covering the global action from a few days ago with banned private jets. But again, it didn't seem to turn into a huge global story like I would like it to be. And I think even if we had maybe 100 scientists risking, so, you know, a factor of 2 or 3 more than we had, I think we might start crossing that threshold. So I really see this as the start of something great, and we kind of continue, like we're learning as we go. But the thing we really need to figure out is how to get numbers and how to recruit new scientists. And in my opinion, you know, not to be, you know, all scientists are super helpful, but maybe I'm biased because I'm a climate scientist, but I'd really like to see more mid-career and even kind of late career climate scientists joining, you know, IPCC authors who just, you know, have completely unassailable credentials. And it's, you know, if we get some of the senior climate scientists risking regularly, that could itself just really change things. So I've started to reach out through my own network, and I think all the scientists in SR should reach out through their networks. And one thing that I want to make really clear now is that the risk-reward ratio from doing these kinds of arrestable actions, at least in the global north, and fairly low risk actions, like the 2 actions I've done, the risk-reward ratio is far more favorable than I thought it would be before I did my first arrestable action. And I think that is a message that I'm going to start trying to broadcast fairly widely, because I feel like maybe fear is the main thing that's holding back the mid to late career climate scientists and others, maybe a lot of other scientists from engaging in scientist rebellion at any level of risk, right? And you don't have to risk arrest to be hugely helpful within this movement. I mean, we also need scientists helping to craft narratives and helping to organize and to speak to the media and just to generally support the overall scientist rebellion movement. And maybe too, getting involved at a lower level of risk will eventually cause people to experiment with higher levels of risk. I think it's actually kind of fun. It is also quite tiring, and it is scary. But so let me just really quickly describe kind of my 2 actions and sort of what my experience was in terms of risk and reward. So the first action I did was basically to close the doors to a JP Morgan Chase branch in Los Angeles. So JP Morgan Chase is the institution on the planet most responsible for funding new fossil fuel projects. And anyone kind of remotely cognizant of the science knows that the first thing we have to do is to turn off the tap of carbon dioxide going into our atmosphere. Actually, not even the first derivative of the carbon dioxide going into our atmosphere, because it's still increasing, by not building out new fossil fuel projects and locking in those new emission sources for the next 3 to 4 decades, right? Whereas world leaders are still kind of accelerating that process as quickly as they can, and the money pipeline is critical for that, right? So we targeted the financial institution and that first action that I personally did in Los Angeles as part of Scientist Rebellion. And I think that's a good strategy. I'd like to continue doing that because I think that's potentially someplace that we can win. But anyway, 4 arrestables walked up to the doors, chained them shut, locked our wrists to the doors, waited for a few hours, and then we were arrested and we were charged with misdemeanor trespassing. And then my charges ended up being dropped later. So the other risk that I was taking at that moment was with my job. So I work for NASA. I'm speaking here on my own behalf. And basically, I did my best to follow their guidelines. There wasn't a lot of precedent for people at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory being arrested. So I did speak to HR ahead of time, but they couldn't really give me much guidance. But I took a vacation day, and I did that with the second action too, and so far I haven't faced repercussions. So follow the guidelines of your institution, but it is a risk. The second action from a few days ago was similar, except I did it at a private airport and a private air terminal that services rich people in North Carolina. But I also did a similar thing where I chain shut some doors and attached to the doors and waited for a little bit, and then I was arrested. And again, I was charged with misdemeanor trespassing. And over the next few months, we'll see what that leads to in terms of penalties. But for the amount of kind of boost I think this has given the overall climate movement, and for the feedback that I get from young people from Just Stop Oil, who tell me all the time that they're grateful that I'm doing this, and I think genuinely take inspiration from scientists around the world that are doing these actions, and from the media. I don't know if you've noticed, but I think over the last few months, the media has really started reporting climate with greater urgency, which I think is critical to we need to get, right now we're at this place where the media tends to downplay the urgency of where we're at. They don't do a good job letting the public know that all of civilization is at risk. They don't do a good job letting the public know that the damage is irreversible. And they don't do a good job letting the public know that it's 80% fossil fuel caused, 15% maybe animal agriculture caused, and that the fossil fuel industry has been lying and colluding quite purposefully over the last several decades, right, to block any action, to bribe politicians, to corrupt the Conference of Parties process. The COP27 has even more fossil fuel lobbyists than COP26 did, right? So they're there. They go to these COP meetings to do kind of backdoor deals, backroom deals, and try to do their best to prevent any action, steer the narrative to false solutions like carbon capture and carbon offsets, and basically ensure that the COP process is a failure. So, but I think more recently, media is starting to up its game a bit, and I think a lot of that has to do with Scientist Rebellion. So that's my pitch. I think that it's just the beginning. I am trying to figure out how to get more scientists engaged at any level of risk. And I don't know, Finlay, what else you'd like me to say?
No, well, that's great. I mean, just for example, in the UK, we only had 3 scientists that joined, and the rest was Extinction Rebellion or other groups. But within the scientists for XR group in the UK, when we posted that on there, they said, "Oh, that just looks like a great action to get new scientists in to do it." So, yeah, I think hopefully that's reflected in other countries as well. And what I'll do is I'll just share. So we had one final slide, which was next steps.
while you're sharing that, can I just say
Yep.
a couple more just kind of things to try to persuade people to come into Scientist Rebellion really quickly. Nothing could be more clear to me than that we're on the right side of history here. I mean, the science certainly supports kind of low risk civil disobedience of the kind that we've started doing in Scientist Rebellion. I think that the science supports even much higher levels of spicy action. That, you know, the movement over the next few years, as people start losing their homes and their livelihoods and their lives, I think we'll see the movement start to get even more radical, if you will, in the near future. So we're certainly on the right side of history. And I don't know, I think it goes without saying how frightening the science is. I think just reading the IPCC summary reports and keeping in mind that most of the damage being discussed there is both irreversible and it's getting worse every single year. The only thing that will actually halt it, however bad it gets, is ending the fossil fuel industry and agriculture industry. So, you know, I don't know what else to say. I guess I'll just leave it there. But I've been a little bit surprised and a little bit frustrated that we haven't had hundreds and hundreds of scientists joining us up till now, because it just seems so clear to me that this is what we need to be doing. All right, I'll leave it there.
Absolutely, yeah. So next steps of the campaign. Obviously, on the website, there is a sign up on the homepage that will then have you join the Action Network. All you need is an email address to do that. Put in your name as well, but you can just use your email address if that's all you want. There is a Telegram group that we'll do as well, just so that we can send out more notifications to people as well, rather than use email. And yeah, so that one's just in addition, really. That's just a broadcast group, so it will just be for announcements. The next talk, we're going to do this again, maybe just based on people's questions or other bits of feedback. Change it, but that'll be in a week's time, so Tuesday, 22nd of November. So we'll put the advert for that out a lot sooner, because we didn't have much time to prep for this one. So please send that to other people and share it with your groups that you think might be interested in getting involved with this going forwards. We can also share resources for you to take to your local action groups. I'm sure anyone here would be happy doing this talk to a group if they need to be convinced. On the website, if you go to makethempay.info, there is a resources tab that has links to some key articles, but it also has all of the banners that are available for download and for use if anyone wants to print the banners and do their own action this way. You're also welcome to modify the banners a bit if you want to put your own logos on them. They're completely kind of open and free to use. Please also do check out staygrounded.org. There's some great resources in there. They're full-time aviation campaigning, and they've got a big network around the world with lots of stuff happening, working groups to get involved with. And they do have an action pot as well that can be used for specific actions. And then, yeah, on the question of further actions, obviously we won't discuss the details of those on this call, but I'm pretty sure over the coming months, people will be keen to do this sort of thing again. And obviously you need to kind of make contact through your networks and find the right people. So what I'll probably do is I can stop there, and we could probably just open up for kind of 10 minutes of questions. If anyone's got anything they want to ask. I don't know if anyone's been looking at the chat, if there's any specific questions that are being asked. It would also be good, I mean, if anyone else wants to add anything about feedback or perceptions of the campaign in your countries, please feel free to type that in or to say something. Gianluca?
To follow up on what Peter was saying, and I mean, first of all, I want to clarify that this campaign, this action was not only led by Scientist Rebellion, but I think it was really a great coalition work with other organizations, in particular Extinction Rebellion, but also, yeah, I think the groups that Finlay is a part of. I think some organizations like Stay Grounded said explicitly that they did not want to get involved into civil disobedience, and I think that's perfectly respectable. And I think it is actually something valuable that groups that do practice civil disobedience get together with other groups that don't. And yeah, I think maybe it's still a little bit too early to assess the impact of this campaign. Personally, I've been reasonably satisfied with the impact that we have had. Also considering that Scientist Rebellion was also busy with other campaigns, so we really couldn't mobilize at full steam, and many people were still very tired after the actions that happened the week before. So I'm pretty sure that if the same amount of resources and energies had been put from the whole of Scientist Rebellion into this specific campaign, we could have got much more. And I think, yeah, I mean, I share Peter's disappointment of expecting more to come, but I think also on the basis of what I know from the social sciences, you know, we talk about social tipping points in addition to climate tipping points, and we know that from at the societal level, maybe nothing or not much seems to happen, but then as soon as something unravels, so there is really a snowballing effect, and more and more people join. So I think we must be persistent, we must be patient, although of course the urgency of the situation really would make us desperate for change to happen as soon as possible, but still we must keep on going. And I think when change, we don't know how far we are from social tipping point. I'm convinced that there are social tipping points, and of course I want to be optimistic, and I want to think that these are not far away, but yeah, I think we must keep pushing. And I think honestly, this action that has brought together groups who were willing to engage in higher levels of disruption with other groups who instead did not do so, I think it was a good example that, yeah, combining these two different tactics, I think it can really be successful. And I stop there. Thank you.
Thanks. Greg, do you want to go next, and then we can go to Nate?
Yeah, just addressing that frustration that others have spoken about getting other scientists in. One tactic that I'm finding is meeting with a little bit of success is asking people in your networks to do specific low-risk things that are in person. If you can get a scientist to show up and hold a banner at something where there's medium or high risk, that sort of starts the escalator, and they develop trust, and they enhance their commitment. So just get folks to show up to do some small thing, and it can help. Check.
Thank you. Nate?
Yeah, and also I would say, I mean, just going off of what I said in the chat, I really was, from our campaign in Germany, I was super impressed about how many people who had never done any actions were willing to step up and risk going to jail. And it really was because we had done a lot of work to make sure we had a space on the ground for people to meet every day and get to know each other. And I mean, we've been speaking with some of the other colleagues that have been involved with this campaign, and really making a point that this is something we'd like to work on, is having a physical space for people to come together. And also I found it was really helpful for particular you know, scientists that are really at a high level in their career, to bring them in as spokespeople and allow them to come to the actions and say, you know, give that really well-refined message that we need as a way of getting them involved. And I think all of these types of things, as Red said as well, you know, doing some kind of low risk action can help people. But we need to go out and meet people in person and speak to them. And as soon as people see who we are and we get to know each other, there's an automatic trust that you just don't have, that you can't make online. So, and that combined with this particular strategy about make them pay, and you know, really going after the super rich, I think those two things of creating these kinds of coalitions is really powerful and will help push us closer and closer towards a social tipping point. Check.
Thanks, Nate. Dov, do you want to go next?
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say I've been involved in a number of different climate campaigns over the last few years, but this one to me was one of the most targeted, and it was, there was almost no pushback outside, you know, amongst others, and so I would encourage us to do more of the same. I think it was very well received out there.
Yeah, my kind of addition to that is right now, I mean, the big group in the UK taking action, I'm sure you're aware, is Just Stop Oil. They've got the most momentum in terms of getting people to sign up and take action, and they're out there constantly in the middle of London and round and about on the motorways and stuff, blocking traffic. And they're getting a lot of airtime in the media, but the media's main tactic, number one tactic, is to say, the climate crisis is bad, we accept this, but do you think it's acceptable to disrupt normal working people, stopping people like causing misery to the general public and stuff? And the thing about this action is they cannot use that narrative, because the average wealth of a private jet owner is more than $1 billion, and that's not the average person. And even the tax frequent flyers is, even within the UK, we fly a lot more than the average. Very few people, like half the population, don't fly still in a given year, and then of those that do, half of them fly once or twice. They're not frequent flyers. So this is really pointing out, and at this point as well, is lots of people are struggling financially, and to see a billionaire filling up the private jet tax free is really frustrating, and a lot of people really understand that. We found a year ago when we did the Farnborough action on social media, even usually a toxic place, lots of people calling out environmentalists, there was a lot of support. So hopefully other people found that as well. Is there anything, anybody else want to say anything, or should we just having a read of the chat? Yeah, an outrageous demand to ban private jets. I mean, if you think about it, so a lot of the scientists are looking at it and saying, well, 1.5 is almost impossible. Just telling the truth about the situation here is we really should not be flying at all. Like, any kind of sane, rational response to complete societal and ecological collapse is to say, like Stay Grounder is saying, we should probably ground all aircraft. That would be pretty logical, really. So simply to tax frequent flyers and to ban the most polluting forms of aircraft is, to me, a fairly lightweight demand, and is kind of entry level, if that makes sense. And I think that's, someone's made the point of, but the Overton window, like that kind of social consciousness of what is possible within the policy space and politics, is we need to, like, particularly people that are taking direct action, be pushing the realms of what's possible over to the side to create a space for people that are more the sort of policymaker, reasonable people to step into and say, well, we're not going to ban private jets, let's at least tax them 5 times higher, and create the space for that.
I would agree that like also in Europe, when Stick Around it started in 2016, it was outrageous to say we have to reduce air traffic. It was like already we asked ourselves, can we say to stop growth? And now it's common sense, at least in the like a lot of people know flying is really bad and that it needs to be tackled in Europe. While in the US, there hasn't been almost any campaigning on air traffic in the last year. So it's clear that their demands seem outrageous still, which here they are already, it really depends on grassroots movement, making those demands, doing campaigns and actions on this topic in order to make those steps. Yeah.
And while the US, it might feel like less over to the left than in Europe. Like you saw the diagram, about 70% of private jets are in the US. So we could stop doing completely in Europe, and we need to tackle the US. So we need people that are making these demands inside the US. Please keep on joining us. Cool. So we've gone over an hour. And it looks like there's no more questions, so we can wrap up there. But yeah, just to reiterate, we'll have another talk like this in a week's time. Please sign up to the mailing list and the Telegram group to hear more about what we're doing. And yeah, thanks for your attention, and hopefully that was informative and you're engaged to get involved in and come and join the next action.